That quiet Tuesday night had started peacefully, lulling me into a deep, comforting sleep. But a gentle knock at my door brought me back, Jamie's soft voice pulling me from the haze. I'd been a single mom for 8 years, ever since his father and I drifted apart, leaving me to balance both joy and exhaustion alone. Jamie was my world, smart, funny, always kind, but sometimes the weight of both roles wore me down. That night, sleep overtook me quickly, the house silent, Jamie already asleep from a night of video games. The moonlight filtered through my room, casting faint shadows as I lay cocooned under warm blankets, thoughts drifting. Then, a knock. I stirred, groggy, hearing it again, soft but steady. "Mom," Jamie's whisper broke through, and I blinked awake, catching his shadow by the door. "Jamie, what's wrong?" I asked, sleep heavy in my voice. He hesitated before stepping in, a trace of unease in his movements. I couldn't sleep," he murmured, eyes avoiding mine. My heart softened. Jamie hadn't slept well in years, the effects of our separation lingering silently. "Come here," I said, patting the bed, inviting him in. After a moment's pause, he climbed in, lying beside me, weariness clear on his face. A flicker of something deeper surfaced, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Want to talk about it?" I whispered gently. He shook his head, his hair shadowing his eyes. "No, I just wanted to be close." Smiling softly, I brushed his hair back, warmth filling my heart. "That's okay, stay as long as you need." Jamie smiled back, though there was something hidden in his eyes, something he couldn't say. I didn't press him. Instead, we lay there, wrapped in silence, letting the quiet night soothe us. His breathing slowed, steady and calm, and I thought he'd drifted off, but then, in the faintest whisper, he spoke. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" The question surprised me, but I didn't need to ask who he meant. I sighed, heart heavy, memories flooding back. "Sometimes," I admitted softly, "but things weren't right between us, Jamie." He nodded, still watching me, as if searching for something. "Do you think things could have been different?" I paused, sadness touching my words. "Maybe, but life moves forward. We do the best we can." Jamie's gaze dropped, fingers fidgeting with the blanket's edge. "Sometimes I wondered if it's my fault, like if I'd been better, maybe he wouldn't have left." His words struck deep, and I turned to face him fully, emotion thick in my voice. "Jamie, you didn't do anything wrong. None of this was your fault." His voice wavered, "But it feels like it sometimes, like I wasn't enough." I reached out, pulling him close, feeling his weight as he finally let himself relax in my arms. "Listen to me," I whispered, voice trembling. "Your dad's choices weren't because of you. You've always been more than enough, Jamie." He nodded against me, tension slowly melting away. We stayed there for a while, holding each other, until his breathing grew steady, sleep taking him. Yet I stayed awake, thoughts racing, my heart aching for all he'd carried in silence. As I held him close, I felt something unfamiliar, something warm and comforting but just as unsettling. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the steady rhythm of his breathing, but that feeling lingered, hovering quietly beneath the surface, like a realization waiting to emerge. In the morning, the sunlight peeked through, softly waking me. Jamie lay beside me, face peaceful, the worries of last night faded. Watching him, love filled me, yet under it all, that feeling remained, unspoken and unknown. I slipped out quietly, making my way downstairs to prepare breakfast, my mind circling back to the night before. Jamie's question had revealed so much, a weight he'd carried, one I hadn't noticed soon enough. As I flipped pancakes, I sensed a shift, something changing between us, a closeness we hadn't shared in years. I felt grateful yet slightly uneasy, recognizing something deeper I couldn't quite name. A few moments later, Jamie came down, rubbing sleep from his eyes, looking younger in the morning light. I pushed aside lingering emotions, smiling warmly as I set the table. "Morning, sleepyhead," I greeted, sliding pancakes onto his plate. He mumbled a quiet, "Morning," digging into his breakfast. Silence hung between us, but it was comfortable, sunlight streaming softly through the kitchen window. After a while, Jamie looked up, his voice quiet but sincere. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." I smiled, heart swelling. "You don't have to thank me, Jamie. I'll always be here for you." Jamie's eyes softened as he looked at me, as if relieved yet still weighed down by something deeper. I could tell he had more on his mind, but he hesitated, as though choosing which words could explain it. The silence between us felt fragile, delicate in a way that reminded me of when he was a child, afraid to share his fears but seeking comfort nonetheless. I watched him, my heart swelling with a mixture of love and a faint ache I couldn't quite shake. "Mom," his voice was soft, tentative, and he glanced down, fingers fidgeting with his fork. "Do you think, if things were different, would we have been okay? You and Dad?" I took a breath, feeling the old pangs of our past but determined to answer honestly. "Maybe," I said carefully, "but sometimes people just grow apart, even if they care about each other. We both tried, Jamie, but things just weren't the same." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words as though he were piecing together a puzzle from our shared history. I could see him grappling with something deeper, something he'd perhaps been holding on to for far too long. "Do you ever think you could love again?" he asked, almost shyly, eyes flicking up to meet mine before glancing away. His question surprised me, and I felt a soft warmth rise in my chest. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's hard to think about, Jamie. After everything that happened, I just focused on being here for you." "You're my priority," he nodded, seeming both reassured and perhaps a little disappointed by my answer. I wanted to reach out, to reassure him of his importance in my life, but there was also a subtle tension, a feeling I couldn't quite name, lingering just beneath the surface. That night still lingered in my mind, and a part of me couldn't quite shake the feeling of holding Jamie close, his warmth and the quiet vulnerability he shared. It was something I hadn't felt in a long time, something that reminded me of how much we'd both endured and how close we'd grown through it all. But there was something else, too, something that unsettled me in its intensity, a feeling I wasn't sure how to name, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. As we finished breakfast, Jamie gave me a small, reassuring smile, his voice gentle as he said, "I'm glad I can talk to you, Mom. I know it's been hard, but it helps." I reached out, placing my hand on his, feeling the connection between us, the comfort we provided each other in our shared quiet moments. "You'll always have me, Jamie," I said softly, hoping he could feel the sincerity in my words. Later, as the day wore on, I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on how close Jamie and I had become over the years. In many ways, he had been my strength, the one who helped me rebuild after his father left. It hadn't been easy, but we'd created a life that was ours, a life that felt strong and resilient in its own way. In the evening, Jamie and I found ourselves watching a movie together, something light and funny to unwind. But even as I laughed at the scenes, my mind kept drifting back to our conversation that morning, the weight of his questions, the warmth I'd felt as I held him close the night before. When the movie ended, Jamie looked over at me, his expression soft, vulnerable in a way I rarely saw. "Thanks for tonight, Mom. I needed that," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as though he was afraid to say it too loudly. I reached out, brushing a lock of hair away from his face, my fingers lingering a bit longer than usual. "You're welcome, Jamie," I murmured, feeling a warmth between us that was both familiar and new, something comforting yet slightly unsettling. As the days passed, I found myself thinking about Jamie more and more, remembering the quiet moments we'd shared, the way he looked at me with such trust, such openness. I wasn't sure what to make of these feelings, and part of me worried I was reading too much into it, overthinking the closeness we shared. But every time Jamie smiled at me, or gave me a small, grateful look, that feeling resurfaced, hovering just beneath the surface, waiting for me to acknowledge it. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat, memories of that previous night flooding back. I opened the door to find Jamie standing there, his face thoughtful, almost hesitant. Can I talk to you for a bit, Mom?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He came into my room, closing the door quietly behind him, and we sat on the edge of my bed, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over us. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about us, about how much you mean to me," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. My heart ached at his words, at the sincerity and vulnerability in his expression. "Jamie, you mean the world to me," I replied, feeling my voice tremble slightly. "I'm so proud of you, of who you've become." He reached out, taking my hand in his touch warm and grounding. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom. You're everything to me." A quiet silence settled between us, both of us lost in the weight of our words, the depth of our connection. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of closeness, a bond that was unbreakable, something that had carried us through the hardest moments of our lives. We sat there, hand in hand, the quiet night wrapping us in its embrace, and for a moment, I felt like time had stopped. All that mattered was the warmth between us, the love that had been there all along, silently growing, deepening with every passing day. And as I looked at Jamie, his gaze meeting mine with a softness that melted my heart, I realized that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. As the weeks passed, our bond only grew stronger. Jamie seemed more at peace, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose in being his mother. We found new ways to connect, sharing laughter, long talks, and moments of quiet understanding. I could see the changes in him, how he carried himself with more confidence, how he began to open up about things that had once seemed too difficult to share. One evening, after a family dinner, Jamie wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug. "Thanks for being here, Mom," he said softly, his voice full of warmth and gratitude. I smiled, holding him close. "Always, Jamie, no matter what." As I looked at him, I knew that despite all we had been through, we had created something beautiful. Our bond was unbreakable, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. We were truly happy, together, stronger than ever.